Hey everybody, it's Katie, the angel that says fuck, and I've been requested by more than one person to sit here and talk about myself, and this is going to be kind of uncomfortable for me because I am a 12th houser, and as in my placements for 12th house, to be specific, are my moon is in the 12th house, and it's conjunct Chiron, and then my other 12th house placement is my Mars. It's in Taurus, into 12th. So I have, you could say, I guess, a 12th house cusp on both Gemini and Taurus. That's when I would use the word cusp. Anyway, so why is that relevant to what I'm about to say? I'm about to talk about my childhood and my religious upbringing and my relationship with my mother accordingly, because that's very interwoven. I hate my hair today. It has nothing to do with what I'm about to say, but it has everything to do with how I feel on camera. Anyway, just distracting myself. My relationship with my mother is very interwoven with my religious upbringing in the way that I was raised Seventh-day Adventist, and her and her family, my mother's and her family to be specific, were the most influential in my life. If you hear that, it's the washing machine doing its thing. It's really loud. So her and her family's influence were the major over my life, and my father was the same religion when I was growing up, but we'll get to that perhaps. His is different now. But okay, so I was not always, I guess you could call it pagan or syncretic or whatever you want to look at it, or Gnostic, because I hold all of these ideals to be valuable. I don't really know what to consider myself, because as I stand, I'm a little bit of everything. I feel a little Buddhist. I feel a little pagan. I feel a little Christian in some ways still, where I very much value the Bible as a scripture. But at the same time, I hold astrology and omens and nature and the stars to be a very syncretic way to weave in a more integrative experience spiritually. So that's, I don't know what to call myself now. I just kind of let people label me and say that's close enough. I don't have one deity. I have worked with singular deities in the past, but as I stand right now, I don't have a single one. Mainly, I've been doing work with my higher self and my inner child to focus more inward. And when I do communicate with a deity, it is, I don't think I use names, but it reminds me of the praying that I did as a child. But as a child, I was raised Seventh-day Adventist, and I stayed in the church probably until I was about 16 or 17. And it was a generational thing. My parents, both of my parents, were Seventh-day Adventists. Their parents were Seventh-day Adventists, and my grandparents on both sides were Seventh-day Adventists. And I believe it went all the way to my great-grandparents, but I'm not sure. So it was very ingrained in my childhood. There was something else that ran in the family was missionary work, and I've done that. I've done 2 missionary trips, one to Honduras and one to Costa Rica in the name of the church, and I helped build, an actual church, and I helped build 4 houses. All those experiences were very rewarding, and I'd never ever trade them for anything, of course. And they all built me up to now, but it still didn't change the fact that I ended up where I ended up. One of the reasons why I left the church was there was multiple reasons, but when I was 14, just 13, 14, because I turned 14 on the first mission trip, my mom decided when I was 13 to have us baptized, but she didn't want us to be baptized in the church. This is one of the many eccentric things she did with me growing up, and I'm about to get into that. That's why I brought up my 12th house moon characteristics, because your moon placement is indicative of your interactions with your mother. And my moon is conjunct Chiron, which is very like open wounds. So she has always been very significant to my because my moon's in the 12th house. My subconscious has had a lot to deal with her, and it has a lot to do with the forming of my thoughts now. So I feel like I'm kind of losing my point here. When it comes to the choices that she made with us growing up, this is before my mission trip and before the breaking with the church. I'll go to that. I was raised in a really unique environment in that my family owned property that I could basically rent and get lost on. It was, when I was a kid, it was a lot more acreage than what it is now, but it used to be in the 100-acre range, and it was very rural. So I could go get lost in nature and have a very close relationship with it. But the other thing that was unique about my childhood is that I was homeschooled for most of my entire educational career as a child. I only had 4 years of like private schooling. That's actual formal education. So I've only had like four years of that. Everything else is basically being self-taught, because the way my mom ran our homeschool was she would let us steer the boat. Basically, it was pretty free form. She would have curriculum books from Mennonites, but we didn't have structure. We could just pick up our books or not. And then at the end of the year, we would be, we filled out our own. My sister and I filled out our own attendance sheets, and filled out our own grades. So it wasn't exactly traditional, and I do have gaps of understanding in my education as a result of this. But at the same time, it led me to my passions in a way, because I had the freedom to pursue them. And what I did as a kid was I would study herbs endlessly, and their remedies and correlations, and I was always obsessed with healing, and not because, okay, another thing about my family is that the health message in the Seventh-day Adventist religion is very strong. And I say way too much, it's annoying. The health message is basically eating the diet of Eden, basically, from the Garden of Eden in Genesis, as a diet to be looked up to, always strived for as the most healthy diet possible. And so I really loved that about my upbringing. I feel like I am on so many tangents, but that's part of what my thing was, is I've always been interested in healing on a spiritual level, not necessarily medical, and all my family for 4 generations back has all been registered nurses. And they've always tried to get me in the business, and I wasn't into that. I've been more about the soul healing and metaphysical reasons for root causes of diseases and diseases that affect us. Like the emotional body is something that needs to be paid attention to in my book. So everybody else is a lot more scientific and practical and has training in that direction, and I've gone the complete opposite direction when it comes to spiritual matters. I'm definitely considered by my mother like to be evil. She's called me demon possessed, and that's before I ever picked up a deck of tarot cards. If she only knew. My grandparents were very involved in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I hope that helps understand how I left the church. I never really came back around to that. But to establish how ingrained it was in my life and everywhere else, my grandparents were very influential, and because of the land that we came to through blood, we were very well known in my hometown. And My grandfather was a pillar of the community, and back in the 1800s, my family helped build one of the first Seventh-day Adventist churches in my hometown. And I'm being kind of vague because I'm uncomfortable speaking about this, and it helps me to be more general. So when I say that I was pushed in a way, like encouraged is a better word, to go to church every Saturday because of my soul needing it. And I was raised to believe that even if you don't want to go to church, you show up and sit in the pew, because if somebody walks in off the street and sees an empty church, they don't want to be a part of it. So it was very much an obligation and a social duty in my household to be a part of it. My grandfather was a board member at Loma Linda Community Church. University, Loma Linda University, college. I am the college, the educational center. Both of my grandparents were well known in that community as well, and it just makes me extremely uncomfortable to talk about to this day, because there's people still living. And the reason why I left the church was when my mother decided to have me baptized. It caused a lot of ruffles in the church because she didn't have me baptized at the church. It was in somebody's jacuzzi, and he happened to be a lawyer, but she considered him a very spiritual man. And so we did baptizing classes with him instead of the pastor. It was just whatever. It seemed normal at the time. But the elders in my church decided that because of that, I shouldn't be treated like somebody that belonged there anymore. I was suddenly not welcome in certain meetings. And there was a plethora of other things that made me feel unwelcome, but that was one of the most personal, was being told that I didn't belong anymore. And I got married at 18, and it made it a lot easier to never show up again. But I had basically around 16, my spirit had left about going to church, and I would drink a lot from 16 on. Whenever I showed up at church, I was probably hungover. During that time, I started to party really heavily and smoke cigarettes and all this stuff you do when you're a rebellious teenager. And then I finally got married and moved state to state to state to state. And my spiritual life has grown since then. I wound up getting my first deck of cards in around 2005 when I was 20, around the same time I started smoking cannabis for my own healing. I had done a bunch of research about it. I had never smoked it as a kid. And that to me was part of the health message that I grew up with, was that every herb that bearing seed, Genesis 1:29, every herb bearing seed has been placed on the planet for the benefit of man and the feeding and clothing of man. So I took that to mean very personally that cannabis was involved in that too. And since then, I've used it for pain management. And that is also due to the fact that there's a generational issue in my family with addiction and pharmaceuticals. So that's another reason why I was, as a child, obsessed with remedies and wanting to make sure that I knew how to use plant medicine instead of popping pills, because I was raised in a household culture of pill popping. And that was something that was a heavily a theme in my when I started falling out with the church. I started taking more pharmaceuticals from my mother's collection, and I would abuse them regularly, and I didn't realize it. But when I moved away at 18 years old after getting married, I moved to Nebraska for a time. And during that time, I had gone through withdrawals. I had no idea how deep into it I was. It was just like a normal thing that you did in my household. And so to this day, I'm really glad that I've gone through what I've gone through, but there's a sensitivity to talking about the church. I still feel protective in a way, but one of the things that really broke me was when I was about 18, 19. Somebody showed me a piece of paper from the tax. I don't know how people found it, but it was talking about financial assessments, and it came straight from the conference, the Southeastern Conference for Seventh-day Adventists. And it listed tithe by race. And I believe it was for tax purposes, and I just felt like it was completely wrong. I don't care if there is a Samoan church, a Filipino church, a Korean church. I don't feel like it's right to, you label it by the district, not by what race is giving more. The blacks this, the Filipinos that, the Mexicans this. I did not like that at all. It bothered me to my core. It felt really wrong, and that's what really caused me to disengage entirely from going. It upset my grandfather at the time, of course, because he was the most involved with the church, but he never really got on my case about it. He just wanted to see me in heaven, and that's what that was about. The beliefs that I hold now, I believe in energy. I believe in the universe. I believe in the law of attraction. I believe in chaos magic. I believe in magic. I believe that witch isn't a bad word. I believe that cards are really important. Tarot cards are really important for helping you to connect with your psyche and your intuition, which can be burned out and quieted all too much because of things like religion. And like, I believe that astrology is integral, and it is in fact some of the basis of what these Bible stories that we were fed growing up. I feel like it's very important to pay attention to allegories that the planets have written, because they mirror as above, so below. Every scripture that I've ever dabbled in studying always leads back to symbolism, and those symbols are always found in the stars. You can't have one without the other in my book. So I will always look up. Even the Bible said, whatsoever is pure, whatsoever is holy, think on these things. And I can't think of anything more pure and holy than the planets, to be honest. Besides the planet Earth itself, there's nothing more pure than those energies and harmonics. And that's what we need to get back to in my gut. Like, the vibrations that crystals have, that's source energy. The stars, transits is source energy. They're all guidelines. The numbers we see, the dreams we have, most importantly. You can't ignore your dreams, write them down, because that's how we get direct communication with no ego involved. It's direct from spirit. So I'm trying to figure out where I'm going with this at this point. Just sitting here drinking my Starbucks, having a lot of thoughts at once. The moon's about to go into Gemini today, and I always get this way where I have so much I want to communicate, and it's a lot harder to do if I don't have somebody sitting across the table asking me questions. So I don't feel like I've gotten deep enough, but you do have more of a background about where I come from, at least. The way I graduated, if you're curious, because I did go through high school, all the way through high school, and I do have graduation, like what do you call it? A diploma. I do have a diploma, but I didn't walk down the aisle for it. It came in the mail, and I wound up having to grade myself at the end of my high school career and give my own attendance. So I gave myself a 3.8 grade point average. because I knew I still had improvement to make in math, but I wanted to give myself a chance later on in life because I knew I wasn't getting a good one where I was at. I still have a lot of desire to become more educated, but I'm doing that. I do take classes here and there when I can. So things get caught up in the 3D a little slower than most for me. Not that I mind. It seems to be the way I work. But my life has, the more I look at it and the more I talk to people, the more I realize that it is completely centered around spirituality. And everything has taught me that I've gone through, everything I've gone through, every rough patch that I ever went through as a child, inside the church or outside of it in my own home, because of the rules from the church, the experiences on the island. When I was being a missionary, I had some paranormal experiences where I was hearing my own name being called, and I would look around and nobody was there, and there was no way in hell it could be anybody. You know, it was just like on the wind. I kept hearing my name, and that was one of the most interesting things. And I've always had dreams about where I was going to be before I got there. Like I'd be, you know, I would get to the brand new country where I was going to be and have memories from a dream that, like I'd already been there. And that's been something that's happened my whole life, is I'll have landmark deja vu is what it feels like. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I need to get into. If you have questions, you know, I want you to ask me questions. I'm going to leave it here, actually. And if you have any more questions about what I've been covering about myself, eventually we'll get Megan maybe in on some of this and we'll have some more chit chat. But she had a different upbringing than I did, in that she'd had zero church experience. So that's really interesting compared to mine, where we were inundated with it. The Bible, if, you know, I spent so much time being dragged to Bible studies as a kid. Like, it was between homeschooling, like I was telling my friend Janina today. It was homeschooling, being stuck on this mountain out in the middle of nowhere with the only curriculum that you have, or nature, or you would be dragged to church to Bible study to read about Daniel and the book of Revelations and prophecy. Like, we were constantly inundated with prophetic symbolism. So it's no wonder why I think in symbols and shorthand and transits and tarot readings, because Daniel and Revelation are both very visual. I mean, even Ezekiel, we got dragged to talks about Ezekiel too, and all of those are very prophetic books in the Bible. They're all symbolism. They're all wildly esoteric. And there's no other way I could have turned out, to be honest. I mean, I got baptized in a lawyer's jacuzzi, for fuck's sake. Yeah, I'll tell you how that is before I end it. That story is really great because, right, like, it was dusk. We had my mom's best friend and one of her daughters, which were my best friends. And we had some neighbors and my grandparents, and of course the lawyer and his family. And when he raised his hand, he was about to dunk me, like, because at Seventh-day Adventist do it by immersion, so that's all the way down and under instead of like sprinkling. He was about to dunk me under, and he was saved by the Father, Son, and the Holy. And then my mom's best friend yelled shit because my mom had caught fire. She was leaning back to take a picture in the fire pit, and her whole sweater caught fire, and it was leaping up like towards her hair. And so he said, by the Father, Son, and Holy. And then she screamed shit. And then chaos broke out because they were trying to pat her down. And then we resumed my baptism. But I'll always remember that. Like, Father, Son, and Holy shit was so fucking funny to me, dude. Oh my god. I hope you're laughing. Yeah, I don't know what to keep going on about, but that was a good story. So, everybody has a past. It doesn't really matter how you've come to the conclusions that you've come to now, as long as you are living in your integrity. I'm sorry this is one of those productions where I look tired and I just rolled out of bed, but it seems to be that the morning time before I put on my makeup and everything is the least busy and the most contemplative. And I do have Starbucks, and so it's time to sit and enjoy it, right? Might as well chit chat. This is the best thing I've ever, like, I've been trying to do as keto as possible, being a vegetarian. And what I have here is a skinny mocha cafe latte with heavy cream. So it's full of fats, healthy fats, and some proteins, and a lot of goodness. So I've run out of batteries, and I guess I'll just like, I love you guys. So hopefully this is going to be interesting to you. Ask me questions if you want to. I'll do more videos like this when I can.